He was just a human, an outsider, sent to marry an alien princess who wanted nothing to do with him. She called him dirty, said he smelled like war. She would rather face exile than touch him. But when the palace locked them alone during a storm, everything changed. One moment, one fall, one gentle hand, and nothing would ever be the same again. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories. And like the video if it moves you. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing this amazing community come together. Now, let's jump into the story. The skies of Lumerus were not blue like Earth's. They were a deep shade of silver blue, always glowing, always still. Twin suns hung low in the horizon, casting long shadows across the spire-shaped buildings of the capital Valer's crown. These towers weren't built, they had grown, crystal by crystal, guided by the minds of the Lumai people, a race as proud as they were old. Torin Vale had never felt more out of place. His boots echoed against the smooth, glassy floor of the Grand Hall, a sound too loud, too human. He tugged at the heavy ceremonial robe, draped over his shoulders, deep green, trimmed with gold, and very much not his style. But his discomfort wasn't about the robe. He had been summoned. No explanation. No invitation. Just a formal message from the Lumai High Court. You are to appear at Valer's crown by the second moonrise. Prepare for union. Union? He hadn't agreed to anything. The human government back home had only hinted at a possible alliance with the Lumai, but no one mentioned marriage. Not once. And yet, here he was, standing before a massive silver door, engraved with symbols that glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. A Lumai attendant with pale skin and emotionless eyes stood beside him. You will enter when the tone strikes, she said. Torin didn't answer. He was too busy trying to calm the quiet storm in his chest. He wasn't afraid exactly, just alert. A soldier's instinct. Something about this felt wrong. The tone struck a low, singing chime, and the doors opened with a whisper. Inside was a round chamber bathed in soft light. Floating globes hovered overhead, releasing petals into the air like falling snow. At the center of it all stood a woman who looked like she had walked straight out of a dream and into a war. She was tall, her figure graceful but strong, her skin shimmering like moonlight against the pale silver of her robe. A delicate veil framed her face, but her eyes violet and sharp cut through the air between them. She didn't speak at first. She just looked at him, like he was a puzzle she hadn't agreed to solve. Finally, she said flatly, "You smell like iron." Torin blinked. "I just came from the transport docks. Long trip." "I expected filth," she said, circling him slowly. "But not this." Her words weren't angry. They were cold, like ice held too long in the hand. Her steps were silent, graceful, like a dancer or a predator. He didn't move. He just let her speak. "I was not told who I was marrying," he said quietly. She turned sharply. "Good. I didn't agree to this union either, but the council decided. So here we are." There was no warmth in her tone, no room for kindness. This was duty. Nothing more. Torin stood straight, his hands at his sides. "You're the daughter of the High Council?" "I am Shonal Thray," she said, lifting her chin. "First of my line, raised for leadership, not for lying beside someone who eats meat with his hands." Torin didn't smile. He didn't defend himself. He simply said, "You don't know me." She turned her back on him and walked toward the far side of the room, where a giant window looked out over the misty mountains of Lumerus. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft drift of petals falling to the floor. Torin looked around the room, taking in its beauty and its coldness. This wasn't a place of love. It was a cage made pretty, The ceremony had been scheduled for the next moonrise. There would be rituals, public oaths, and some kind of bonding process. The humans barely understood. But right now, none of that mattered. She didn't want him, and he wasn't sure he wanted this either. But one thing struck him deeply. When she first looked at him, just for a split second, her eyes hadn't only shown anger, there had been fear. Not fear of him, but of what being near him might awaken in her. A loss of control, maybe. Or worse hope. Torin didn't say anything else. He simply walked to the opposite side of the room, sat down cross-legged on the floor, and looked out the same window she did. He stayed far enough to respect her space. Close enough to be present. He didn't need to prove anything. He just needed to make it through this ... without breaking her already fragile world. Morning on Lumerus was quiet too. Quiet for someone like Torin Vale. The sun had barely risen, but he was already dressed, seated on the outer balcony of his temporary chambers. His robe lay folded. Beside him, his bare back, marked with old scars, caught the soft glow of the twin suns. He liked the silence. It was honest. Behind him, silk curtains fluttered gently. Unseen, Chanel Thray watched him through the veil. She hadn't expected to see him awake, let alone still. His posture was calm, not tense. He didn't look like a man desperate to impress, or to escape. He just sat like silence was his first language. When he finally turned, their eyes met. He didn't speak, didn't smile. He just gave her a slight nod. It wasn't a bow. It wasn't submission. It was respect. She hated that. Later that day, tradition forced them together again. This time, in the upper sanctum gardens, surrounded by soft glass-winged insects and glowing blossom lanterns that floated gently in the air. The table was set with small, elegant dishes. Chanel sat straight, silver markings on her forehead shining faintly. Torin sat across from her, elbows on the table, eating slowly, without fuss. Too calm, she thought. You eat like someone who's hiding something, she said. I eat like someone who's hungry. A pause. She narrowed her eyes. Is it true you're kind mate without permission? He raised a brow. Without ceremony, maybe. Never without permission. She looked away. That was not the answer she expected. And is it true you boil animals and eat them with your bare hands? Torin swallowed his bite. Only when we're cold or in a hurry. She leaned back, letting her irritation show. She wanted him to snap, to argue, to prove what she had always believed. The humans were crude, loud, and unpredictable. But he didn't take the bait. Instead, he watched her, not with judgment, not even attraction, just curiosity. As if he was trying to understand the truth behind her mask. That made her uncomfortable. The next evening, a storm rolled across the twin moons. Elegant streaks of lightning painted the skies. The palace sealed its doors, an old safety protocol. No one in, no one out, which meant Chanel found herself stuck with him again. This time, in the observation chamber, with a glass dome above. Gave a perfect view of the storm. He was already there when she entered. Calm, as always. I didn't plan this, he said, standing up. I know, she replied, brushing past him. She found the cot in the corner and gave it a look like it had insulted her. You take it, she said. He didn't argue. All right. Hours passed. The wind howled. Rain tapped against the glass in rhythmic pulses, and not a single word was exchanged. The room felt tight, despite its size. Then it happened. Simple, sudden. Chanel stepped forward and caught her foot on a raised tile. She fell hard, but not all the way. Torin caught her before she hit the floor, arms steady, grip strong. No wandering hands. No smirk. Just support. Are you hurt? He asked. Her pride screamed yes. Her voice said no. She stood quickly and brushed herself off. But before she turned away, her eyes caught something. A scar, jagged, thick, running along his side. It looked fresh. War-born, she said quietly. You've killed. He nodded. Too many. But you're gentle. I had to learn to be. She didn't sleep that night. Not because of the storm, but because that answer unsettled her more than thunder ever could. By the time the next sun rose, something inside her had shifted. That it wasn't trust, not yet, but it was curiosity. That evening, the ritual robes were prepared. The union ceremony was just days away. Chanel stood before her ceremonial mirror, fingers adjusting the silver sash draped over her shoulder. But her reflection didn't hold her attention. Her thoughts were with Torin, the outsider who didn't flinch when she insulted him, who never tried to charm or convince her, who simply showed up. She found him again on the balcony, sitting beneath the glow of the blossom tree, sharpening a blade that clearly wasn't for show. It was worn. Functional. She approached quietly. I insulted you, she said. He looked up. You did. I meant it. I know. She crossed her arms. You think that makes you noble? No, it makes me tired. That answer hit something inside her chest she didn't expect. The wind rose. Soft rain began to fall, pink-tinted droplets, blown sideways by the wind. She didn't move. He did. Torin stood, removed his ceremonial cloak, and gently draped it around her shoulders. No words, no claim. Her hand reached up, caught his as he withdrew. Their fingers tangled for a moment, and her breath caught. Why are you like this? She whispered. He could have said many things. Instead, he said softly, because someone needs to be, when no one else remembers how. For the first time, Chanel Thray, daughter of power and legacy, didn't speak with pride. She just stood beside him, not as a ruler, but as a person, quiet, unsure, and maybe no longer so alone. The days grew quieter in Valer's crown. The storms had passed, but the silence that followed seemed to settle deeper than before. Not just in the sky, but between two people caught in a situation neither had asked for. Chanel Thray stood at her chamber window, watching the city below. The towers shimmered in the fading light, glowing like crystal bones against the silver sky. Her silver veil rested across her shoulders now, no longer draped in perfect folds. She told herself it was just the heat. But really, it was something else. She had been trained to lead, to speak, to argue. But around Torin Vale, she found herself speaking less and thinking more. It was confusing. It was dangerous. She told herself it was just curiosity. And yet, she found herself seeking him out, not because she had to, but because he didn't demand anything from her. He didn't try to impress her. He simply existed in a way that made space feel bigger, not smaller. She found him again in the courtyard, sitting beneath the blossom tree. The petals drifted around him like falling stars. In his hands, he held a blade, polishing it carefully. It wasn't ornate. It was practical, scarred, used, real. He didn't look up when she approached. He simply said, "It's not ceremonial. It's from home. I brought it in case I needed to cut my way out." "And do you?" she asked. "I don't think so. Not anymore." She stood in silence, unsure of her own voice. "I insulted you again yesterday," she said. "You did. I even meant it." He nodded. "You're very consistent." She frowned. "And you never react. I've seen worse than words." "That's not strength," she said sharply. "No," he agreed, meeting her eyes for the first time. "It's restraint." That stopped her. No one in the court ever backed down. No one ever softened their edge. But here he was. A man from a species they called lesser, sitting like the world wasn't pressing down on his shoulders. "You're the first person I've ever met who doesn't flinch around me," she said after a long pause. "I've met too many people who wore crowns but didn't deserve them," he said softly. Her throat tightened. She hated that answer. She hated how true it felt. A gust of wind moved between them. Her veil fluttered up, lifted by the breeze, and for a moment it hung in the air between them before drifting gently to the ground. She didn't pick it up. She stood in the soft rain that had begun to fall, those strange pink-tinted drops the Lumai skies were known for. They slid down her shoulders, clinging to her skin. She shivered but didn't move. Torin stood and, without speaking, removed his cloak again. He stepped forward, careful and slow, and placed it around her. Once more, no grabbing. No drama. Just kindness. As he pulled away, her hands caught his. They both froze, eyes locked. Her voice barely carried over the rain. "Why are you like this?" He could have given 100 reasons. He could have talked about his past or his pain, but instead he answered quietly, "Because someone needs to be when everyone else forgets how." Her breath caught. She didn't cry, but she also didn't let go. That night, she didn't return to her quarters right away. Instead, she sat beside him beneath the tree, watching the moons rise through the mist. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of questions, of memories, of something neither of them could name yet. They spoke in small pieces. He told her about Earth, how the air sometimes smelled like dust and rain together. How people danced not for ceremony, but just for joy. She told him about the sky temples, about the weight of tradition that had never once felt like home. How she had been raised to serve, not to feel. "When I was a child," she said softly, "they told me love was for the weak." "And you believed them?" She paused. "I didn't know there was another way." Torin didn't respond. He didn't need to. The silence between them said more than words could. Later, as the wind calmed and the stars appeared, Shano leaned back against the tree and sighed. Not out of frustration, but something closer to peace. She wasn't sure yet if she trusted him. But she knew one thing for certain. She didn't fear him anymore. And for someone who had been taught her entire life to fear weakness, that realization felt like freedom. When their hands touched again lightly, almost by accident, this time she didn't pull away. The moonlight felt different that morning. The air in Valer's crown was still, almost too still, like the entire city was holding its breath. Shano Thray stood barefoot in the Hall of Judgment, her silver veil pulled low over her face. It wasn't the veil of a bride now. It was the cloth worn before exile, before punishment. Behind her, torn veils stood silently. No robe, no weapon. His hands were empty, but his shoulders were square. He wasn't afraid, not for himself, but for her. The council chamber buzzed with whispers. The elders had learned of what happened between them. It wasn't just that they had grown close. They had broken tradition. The binding had not been completed in the temple. The rituals were not followed. There had been no public vow, no blood signing. Instead, there had been choice. And that, in the eyes of the court, was unforgivable. "Did the human touch you?" demanded one of the high voices. Seer Maltron, known for his cold heart and ancient authority. Shano didn't move. "He did not take anything," she said. A breath of relief passed through the circle of robed figures until she added, "I gave myself to him." Gasps filled the room. "You desecrated the rites," a priestess hissed. "You were not yet bound. You shamed your name." "I chose," Shano said firmly, stepping forward. "For once in my life, I chose." "You chose a human," the seer spat. "A being with no bondmark, no purity, no place in our lineage." Torin's voice was quiet but clear. "I never asked to be chosen. And yet here you are, someone snapped. Then came the guards' 6 armored sentinels, stepping into the chamber with glowing blades humming softly. They surrounded Torin, weapons raised. "Your presence has defiled royal blood," Seer Meltron said. "You will not leave this room alive." Torin looked to Shonal. "Tell me to run," he whispered. She didn't. She turned to the guards, eyes glowing with fury. "No." The first guard lunged. Torin moved without hesitation. He dropped low, grabbed the edge of his ceremonial brazier, and slammed it into the attacker's side. Sparks flew. Armor cracked. Before the others could react, he was already moving, dodging, disarming, disabling. Not with anger, but with control. With skill. The crowd screamed. Elders rushed to the sides. The temple filled with chaos. And still. Shonal did not scream. She stepped forward, pulled the golden chain from her veil, and held it high. The ancient artifact shimmered with ancestral light. "Enough," she shouted. The room froze. "I am first of the Thray line," she said. "By soul right and blood wisdom, I declare this man, Torin Vale, my chosen bondmate." The silence that followed was like the air before lightning. "You cannot," Seer Meltron breathed. "You dare." "I do," she said. "Because he is not my shame. He is my will." She reached for Torin, still breathing hard from the fight, and pulled him to her side. "You stood here waiting for obedience," she said to the court. "But what you feared most was union. Real union, not forced, not arranged, but chosen." He looked at her not with surprise, but with gratitude. That night, they stood alone in the Blossom Court. She wore no crown now, only a simple braid. The wind tugged at her loose veil, and her bare feet brushed against the soft grass. Torin had cleaned the blood from his hands, but the memory lingered. "I don't want to take you from your world," he said. She stepped closer, gently placing her hands on his. "You didn't," she said. "You gave me back to myself." Above them, the twin moons crossed in the sky, a rare sign, said to mark new beginnings. She reached for his hand, fingers threading through his. "Will you still have me?" she whispered. "Even after all this?" "I would die 1,000 times," he replied softly, "if it meant you'd live even one day free." And this time, when she kissed him, it wasn't soft or uncertain. It was fierce. It was real. A queen who had chosen her own king. They left the city not long after. No throne. No court. Just peace. 5 years later, pink blossoms drifted across a quiet valley on a distant moon. Children with mixed eyes and different skin tones ran barefoot through the fields, chasing floating lights and laughing in the warm wind. Inside, a round windowed home, Torin stood sharpening a hunting blade at the table. Shonal entered behind him, her belly round with another child. Her veil hung loose over one shoulder, and a smile danced at the corner of her lips. "They still call you outsider?" she asked playfully, resting her forehead against his back. He chuckled. "Only the ones who've never stepped outside." She slid her arms around his waist. "And you still love me?" "Especially because of that." They stepped out together, watching their children race toward the trees. The empire hadn't fallen, but it had changed, because one man once, called unworthy, had shown a world built on control, what it meant to love with gentleness, to fight with honor, and to leave someone more whole than you found them.